And we are back after a pretty lengthy hiatus for yours truly. Pound for Pound Boxing Report is back, episode 463. I am your host, Michael. Joining me this evening, per usual, Gail from nyfights.com, Daniel from Four Boxing News, and the Inscriber. What's going on, lady and gent?
Well, it's good to be back and just in time for a blockbuster boxing card this weekend. And we'll get into it. So join the live chat, get involved. Want to hear from you.
Yep.
Indeed. The time for the cause of the lengthy hiatus, just on the personal end, life was lifing. I had a series of unfortunate tragedies throughout my family, back to back to back, within the last 2 months or so at the beginning of the year, and even into here in 2025. And it took a little bit of a hit on me, but I've got myself back together enough to do this episode to get back to getting the podcast started, at least for those who are new to Pound for Pound Boxing Report, Pound for Pound Boxing Report live YouTube show, podcast, discussing all things boxing. The motto is when boxing is good, we will talk about it. When it's bad, we will talk about it. Bottom line is, if it concerns the sweet science, we will talk about it. If you want to email us with any comments or questions or even suggestions, you can do so at P4Pboxing at P4Pboxingreport.com. If you want to check us out on social media, you can do so on Twitter, because I refuse to call it X, at P4P Boxing Report. And we're also on Facebook, here on YT on YouTube. We're also on IG as well. If you wish to donate, let donation be the best nation. Wouldn't matter to us, $1, $2, $5, whatever you want to contribute. You do so on Cash Me and PayPal, preferably the PayPal route, because Cash Me has changed their rules over the last 6 months, and it makes it a little bit harder to contribute. But if you want to do so, you can do so on on PayPal, Cash Me, and especially PayPal, at um, MICHAELWP4P. Let me repeat that again, at MICHAELWP4P. Let's get things going. Loaded weekend, bit of a controversial weekend, I should dare I say. Starting the show with ladies first, as usual. Let's start in England, Gail, right? And the situation with Teofimo, we'll get to that later. Um, he's been in hiatus right now. The WBO at 140 has ordered this bout between Jack Catterall and Arnold Barboza for the WBO interim title. Competitive fight, maybe not the most exciting fight in the world, but if you like boxing, if you like chess, if you will, very good fight in my opinion. Barboza ended up getting by split decision. I had it for Barboza. I know for someone had it for Catterall. It could have went easy either way. Your thoughts, Gail?
When you have to go to enemy territory, enemy turf, like Barboza Jr. did, the belief is that to get the nod and the decision, you really have to do more than just shade it, right? You can't just win 7 rounds. You probably need to win 8 or 9, or you've got to have a knockdown, or they've got to be absolutely definitive rounds. Case in point, Dmitry Bivol, Canelo Alvarez in Las Vegas. That's Canelo's turf, right? Bivol probably won 10, 11 rounds of that fight and barely squeaked by on the cards. So you assume that Barboza, to win, is got to have to do the same thing. And here we had an extremely tactical fight, very cagey fight by both guys, and a hair's difference between them in a lot of those rounds. And so you hear the judges' cards, it goes to the judges, even though both guys vowed not going to go to the judges. It goes to the judges, and you hear a 115, 113 card for each man. And I'm thinking, all right, this Catterall fight, if it's that close on the cards, not going to go to Arnold. But sure enough, a 115 113, second card goes to Barboza for the win. Good for those judges. Everything was done absolutely right. Probably Arnold could have won a few more rounds, but it was a razor close fight, and I am delighted that cards that close did go to him. He landed more punches. He was more efficient. And further, for most of the fight, he was the man dictating the action and backing Catterall up. And to me, that passes the smell test for sure. The other thing that saved that fight for Barboza was the fact that it appeared I can't recall the round, pardon me, that there was a knockdown. Catterall did land a punch. Barboza did go down. It was a tangle of feet. Barboza made it clear it was, and thankfully, we avoided an incorrect call of a knockdown that did not affect the fight. Had a knockdown been called, that fight would have been, I believe, a majority draw. But nevertheless, it was the right decision. It shows that once in a while, boxing does get things right. Let's celebrate when it does. Barboza was emotional at hearing that final scorecard called for him. He even said later that he wasn't sure he was going to get that nod, but he did do it. You're watching the realization of a dream for somebody who has not always had it easy, who for a lot of his career had to hold a job full time, then go train. It's only been recently, even though he's got almost 30 fights under his belt, he was only training full time fairly recently. Now he's got, yes, it's only an interim title. However, there's a very good chance he'll end up being elevated with that belt. And he's in the driver's seat now, certainly compared to his options prior. And good for him. He stuck it out. His father trainer, as Arnold said about his dad, is finally getting some props for what he's accomplished with him. And it was truly a team effort. And I have to admit, what tickled me and it made me laugh was watching the post-fight news conference with Barboza's manager, Rick Meridian, grinning from ear to ear, saying that first thing today, he would be calling Teofimo Lopez's manager.
Okay, I am back. My apologies, everyone. Um, Here's the question. Follow up before we move on to other fights, Gail. My apologies if you addressed this. I had to step away. Teofimo, we don't know where he's going right now. We will talk about him in depth later on, right? Because he kind of injected himself into a story, uh, and that will get addressed. But don't know who he's fighting, what division he's fighting. Barboza is interim champion. By rule, he's supposed to, his next fight or an upcoming fight with him is supposed to be against Teofimo. Do you think we will ever see Teofimo Lopez and Arnold Barboza in a ring in 2025?
Well, it's going to depend quite a bit on what Teofimo decides is more important to him. Do you want to hang on to his belts? Does he want to try to seek out a bigger money fight, a bigger prestige fight, if you will? Because let's face it, as solid as Barboza's accomplishment was, he's not a big name in the sport. He's very well known here in California, where he's plied his trade most of the time. But he's not going to be a big person, a big ticket seller, right? The only thing we can have going on with him is perhaps setting up this, sort of rivalry between somebody who's from Central America and an American, Mexican American. But, that's a bit of a stretch. Lopez, has been talking it up with Turki Alalshikh, who hasn't? We'll talk about that later too. And it might be that Teofimo decides, yeah, I'm really more interested in the big payday. I don't give a damn about the belts. And Turkey will make fights that don't have belts on the line if he thinks they're more entertaining for big money. That might be the way that the Catterall goes. If that's the case, he'll move on. And perhaps he wants to move up a division as well. But we don't really know what's going on with Teofimo. He's been out of the ring far too long. He talks a lot of nonsense. And who's to say what's going on in his head? And that has been one of his big problems through his career. He has shown us flashes of tremendous talent, and he also shows us flashes of complete inattention and drive. When somebody has to ask her after one of his old fights, do I still got it? Yeah, I think he answers his own question. So I don't think that Barboza should be waiting around too much. Let's see what Rick Bergian and Teofimo's manager, Keith Conley, get up to. What kind of conversation is that going to be? Luckily, Barboza can cool his heels for a few weeks and see what happens.
Sorry, I was on mute. Catterall and Barboza, excuse me, took place in the UK. Let's move on to New York City. We will talk about Berinchyk and Davis in a bit, but I want to focus on some of the undercard bouts, Daniel. First off, the co-main, quote unquote, if you will, you got Xander Zayas, who's ranked number 1 by the BO at 154, fought Slawa Spomer, knocked him out, well, stopped him, I should say, he did knock him out in 9. Not knocked him out, stopped him in 9, excuse me. Zayas, we've talked about here on this podcast numerous times. He has talent, but the more I watch him, the more I'm beginning to agree with what Timothy Bradley has to say about him. During this particular fight on ESPN, he says that Bradley basically said that while he thinks that Zayas is good, he's up and coming, he doesn't see anything quote unquote special, right? And at moments in this fight, he got caught, and I thought he got buzzed a bit by a shot from Spomer. I'm not saying he's not a bad fighter, Zayas. I'm not saying he's not talented, because he is. My question is, coming off of this fight, how would he compare with the elites at 154? That remains an unanswered question for me. Your thoughts on this fight and the progression of Zayas up to this point?
It was a fight that Xander technically did what he was supposed to do. He was supposed to get some rounds in, try to end it in good fashion, and try to highlight saying, "Yeah, I'm a contender. I'm ready." The question, unfortunately, is remaining is whether he actually is ready. Mainly because, unfortunately, from what I've seen, especially over the past 2 to 3 years, it's not as it now. I'll preface this. This is not as bad as what happened with Edgar Berlanga. But I do see, unfortunately, and this might be partially Top Rank being a little bit too careful with him, but a certain plateau that he's hit as far as what his skill set the and what he can actually do in the ring now. Is it put up or shut up time? Yeah, it has to be, because you're at a point where you're in a division where it's pretty open, yet at the same time, you can't be perpetually stuck in this contender phase that you're going to do, which is that's the bad part of it. That's the bad part that he's in. And hopefully, to me, they're able to recognize that Top Rank's able to recognize it, notice the flaws that he had, notice that he still can get touched, and maybe you don't may have to have a trainer change, maybe not that drastic yet, but bring in somebody new, bring in somebody that also that works a little bit more in this defense and land a dimension more in Xander Zayas' game because the kid has talent and the kid does have charisma, but the problem is you don't want it to plateau to the point. You don't want to reach the point where you plateau, like example, like Berlanga did, where it became pretty much what it was. Like he can't hit us. He hit a ceiling that he can no longer
But did
crack.
Berlanga plateau, or was he never that good to begin with? I think there's a difference.
I would say I think it's a mix of both because that's the bad part of it with Top Rank. I know what Top Rank's trying to do. They want to carefully match their guys and try to build it through their base, but at the same time, sometimes you got to throw these kids to the fire. You got to see what they're gonna do because otherwise you get a little bit comfortable and you wind up in a situation like Berlanga's where it just the progress wasn't there and you ultimately had to cut him loose. I don't think Xander's nowhere near that yet, but hopefully you're trying to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, he's ranked number 1 by the BO, as I mentioned. Um, he's talking Vergil Ortiz. He's talking Bud. He's talking the guy who starched out Tim Tszyu, uh, Murtazaliev. Okay, you want to talk that way, and you rank that high. To your point, Daniel, there's no turning back right now. Time to put him in there. Time to really, really test him to see what he's really about. On this deep on the undercard, Gail, and it's a sad indictment. This situation. For the record, yes, top prospect Abdullah Mason, uh, um, he won, but even before the Abdullah Mason fight that took place on ESPN Plus, Gail, the second fight of this card, Big Baby Anderson, they put him there. And yes, he won, but he didn't look good, complaining throughout the rounds in between. After the first round, saying that, oh, he's tough. I don't want to go 10. They asked him to go to the body. I don't want to go to the body. I don't want to hit elbows. And even a couple times, I thought the opponent that he fought got his attention. Killias, Marlos Killias. What does it say about Jared Big Baby Anderson? For me, not just mental, but for the most part, the intangibles, the mental aspect, not physical, but the mental and the intangible aspects. To me, he's sounding and acting not just someone who's immature, but not someone who's a real fighter's fighter when it comes down to it.
This should have been no surprise, honestly. Top Rank put him way down in the card, buried him on the streaming undercard to let him get his sea legs back under him after taking a complete and thorough beating from Martin Bakole. So they bring in a opponent from Greece, okay? And there was only one reason that guy got himself a free trip to the United States, to be a moving heavy bag for Jared Anderson, to get him a win, kind of rehabilitate him. And that is not what happened. Anderson clearly is still suffering the effects of the PTSD from that beatdown. But long before that fight, Anderson has demonstrated, some questionable attitude toward his career in boxing, that he wanted to be done by the time he was 27 years old, Well, it looks like he might be done by the time he's 26. He might just decide he's done. He's got all the physical tools in the world, but seems less than committed, less than driven to succeed at professional boxing. And no one can force him to do it but himself. Whatever reason he's pursuing boxing, he needs to find whether he's still got any true motivation, any true north toward a goal here versus I want to make my money and get out and be less than satisfied to, winning a title or whatever his original goals were. They clearly aren't there. And Anderson would not be the first fighter, far from it, who had all the physical talent, passed the eye test, excited people about him in the world, but didn't have the discipline, the drive, the mental toughness that are absolutely 100% required to succeed in one of the toughest sports on the planet. He doesn't have it. He demonstrated that chattering about, I'm going to be out. Nah, I'm not going to be out this long. And then he takes a beat down. He comes back for a soft touch, and he's not there. He's not in it. He's just not in it. So he needs to be honest with himself. He needs to be honest with Top Rank, and they need to have a come to Jesus meeting with him and his management and perhaps his family, whoever is in his circle, to say, what's the deal? If he wants to continue, he's got to, as a referee says in the ring, you got to show me something. He has shown nothing in that last fight that makes you want to continue to invest in him. And the only reason he's going to get a second, maybe a third and a fourth chance is the state of the American heavyweight scene. Think about it. Who is there here in the United States that's any sort of player in the heavyweight division? You're really down right now to Richard Torres Jr. and Anderson. And that's not going to cut it. As talented as Torres might be, he is unfortunately a throwback size heavyweight. Now,
yeah, very small
for
for today's
Alexander
standards.
Usyk has overcome that, but it's because of Usyk's, tactical, amazing skill set has allowed him to overcome it. Torres is kind of a seek and destroy guy, but in the heavyweight division at 6'2", you probably can't be like that. I mean,
That's not going to cut it with these behemoths.
Well, he could prove us wrong, and he should have every opportunity to do that. But man, putting all your eggs in that basket, yeah, I don't think you want to do that. So, maybe Top Rank will keep him floating along, him being Anderson, long enough to tee him up for somebody as a name opponent, and then they'll get taken out. We'll see what happens. I mean, maybe they serve him up to, God forbid, they serve him up to F.A. Ajagba, or that he becomes a name opponent again. But having taken such a horrible beating, and one in which he showed a lot of heart. I was there at that fight. He could have stayed down, maybe not after the first knockdown, but had he not gotten up after the second one, nobody would have thought any worse of him. And he did get up after the second one and then got knocked down a third time, and they were all rough knockdowns. So he had something, he had the glimmer of something there. Can he dig it back up, or did it get beaten out of him? Based on this last fight, it looked like it's gone. He certainly deserves at least one more opportunity. I'm not sure they're going to give him more than that. And what a
The
shame.
the fact that, first of all, shout out to Beagle 47. He said glad we're back. Sincerely appreciate it. And his comments are basically spot on. Said y'all
Spot
saying
on.
he acted like a big baby. Absolutely. I covered this fight for this card, for Three Kings Boxing. Please check out threekingsboxing.com, your source for pure, unadulterated boxing information. Shout out to the entire Three Kings Boxing staff and crew and contributors. 2K, the man behind Three Kings, Bo, who's our senior writer and head of media relations. You've heard him on the show numerous times in the past. Shout out to Bakari, fellow senior writer. I'm a senior writer. Shout out to Jay, Corey, Zoe, Red, and everybody else behind the scenes. Um, I covered this card, and yeah, Beagles, you're right. He did act like a big baby throughout the fight, from the end of the opening round up until the end. Just perplexing to your point, Gail. There are serious questions in terms of the mental makeup of this guy. And you mentioned that they may give him one more chance. Well, he's skating on thin ice, Gail, because the fact that they put him the second fight of a card that started at what, 5 o'clock, 5:30? Yeah, 5:30 Eastern time. And he's the second fight. And keep in mind, this guy is still rated at heavyweight.
Well, they had to give
But,
him they had to give him a rehab assignment, and I get that.
but to
Just like
put
they
him so
had,
low on the card,
but
though,
just like they gave a rehab assignment to Nico Ali Walsh in the first fight before him, and he lost. He flat out lost. So Top Rank is, reassessing its talent pool. Just
exactly.
just
To
because
me, that
you're
says that
a certain level on the card doesn't mean you're going to stay there forever. Just because you're a good looking doesn't mean you always get a position on the main card. You know,
indeed.
Top Rank knows how to sort its talent, and they're very clear about what they have and what they don't. They are very supportive. They'll work with you as long as they can, but they're a
They
business.
will cut you loose, and they will do what they have to do when it comes down to it. And yeah, there's some. I think they're having some reevaluations when it comes to Big Baby Anderson as well as Nico Ali Walsh, who you noted in the first fight of this card. He lost a decision. Let's move on to the what I consider the main fight of the weekend, and that is the lightweight bout between Dennis Berinchyk, defending the WBO lightweight belt, against Keyshawn Davis. I want both of you into the discussion. I'll start with you, Daniel. We'll get to the controversy before the fight. Um, we'll put that kind of in a news segment, if you will. But to the fight itself, I thought that Baranchyk would give Davis a good test, right? Baranchyk is a veteran. He has a
Mhm.
tricky style, right? But after it took him a couple of rounds to figure Baranchyk out, Daniel, Davis went to work. He noticed how Baranchyk tends to bounce up and down, caught him, got his rhythm, and went to the body. And then once he found out he could hurt to the body, game, set, match. Davis stops him in fourth round. And the way that he ended matters with the left hook, very impressive.
Yep. It was a very, very impressive fight for Keyshawn Davis. And it's actually one of the main things, like we talked about Xander's eyes. This is one of the things that we wanted Keyshawn to show. Because, okay, this is a title fight versus somebody that can be seen as a tough challenger to face. And it only took him, a couple of rounds for him to see, okay, I can hit him to the body. He moves a little bit too much. He doesn't have the guard in the body enough in order for me to land my shots. And that's exactly what happened. And that's what you need from a kid that you're grooming like Top Rank, to show that they're able to take care of business and take care of it when they see the opportunity. This was a great, great showing by Keyshawn Davis. Obviously, when winning in the Hula Theater, the small room in the garden, and making yourself known in a division that is, depending on who you're looking at, maybe facing some turmoil. But it's going to be interesting to see what you're going to do now. You have a championship. Do you push the buttons to unify? I would probably say get one good defense from Keyshawn in before you can see if you can do the unification route, because it could be a case of hindsight be 2020 and Berinchyk may not be as good as we thought he would, or it could be a situation where Keyshawn really stepped up when he needed to. But I like doing it. I like the fact that he didn't take that long to figure Berinchyk out. Not only that, it didn't take him that long to really, really grind down and not headhunt. He did the work that a lot of people don't like to do. Like we talked about, Big Baby didn't want to do, which is go to the body.
One of the things that you love, one of the things that you love about a fighter, Gail, is someone who's not afraid to attack the breadbasket. That's what Keyshawn Davis did to basically end matters here. Um, if you were to ask me a year ago, 18 months ago, did I think that Keyshawn had the stuff, meaning the stuff to win a world title? I had my questions, but I got to salute him um, for him maturing in the ring, because he had an issue where he was suspended for testing positive for marijuana. He got himself together outside the ring. You've seen the progression inside of the ring. And to Daniel's point, he's right there in the thickets within a 135 landscape that I think, look, I don't care if Tank Davis is the it guy and makes all the money. Um, to me, he can be beat, right? And outside of him, um, the division is there are some open spots there, right? I don't see Keyshawn fighting Shakur. They're really good friends, but Keyshawn wants to fight Tank. I say give him a couple of title defenses, uh, build some corn in the bank. I would not mind seeing Keyshawn fighting another top rank lightweight, Muratala. That would be an excellent fight, right? He gets that. He gets that test and surpasses it. That's that bolsters his resume even more, because I think Muratala is a real talent himself. But if the goal is for them to fight Gervonta Davis, why not go for it and say 26, early 27?
Well, as disappointed as Top Rank had to be at Jared Anderson, they have got to be elated with Keyshawn Davis. What a great performance. Sometimes a fighter needs to take a little bit of a psychic body blow to decide whether or not they're serious about this profession. I think that uh, getting popped, testing positive for marijuana, showed Keyshawn that if he really, really wants this, that he needed to buckle down. And you know what? To his credit, unlike other fighters who don't get the message, that's exactly what he did. It came at a great time for him. He decided, yep, I need to straighten up. I need to clean up my lifestyle. I need to decide how serious I am. In that time, he's also become a father. That seems to have really settled and focused him. And that focus is what changes somebody with skills to a champion like this. He wanted it, he worked for it, he took the necessary sacrifices that it takes to get it. And then you get to hear those three magic words, and the new. And who knew he was going to blow out Berinchyk like that? My God, that's a star making performance. What happens to him from here? He's got it on a string. He really does. There are so many good options for him. And a lot of it's going to play out in some of the matchups in the division that are scheduled in the next few months. You are going to see his pal Shakur Stevenson this weekend. How's he look? You're going to see his opponent, Floyd Schofield. How does he look? Who's going to win that fight? They're both ranked. Floyd is currently, I think, just outside the top 10. You've got other guys out there that are floating around that are names. How's Tevin Farmer going to do against William Zepeda in their rematch? And then you've got Zepeda flowing around. Top rank and Golden Boy will do business when it comes down to it. Um, you've got Frank Martin as a placeholder sort of fight. You've Lucas.
Uh,
You have Lucas Body in the division, who is
and you
under.
got um Keyshawn's nemesis in the amateurs, Cruz, who's ranked number one by the BC.
Yeah, and to me, that is honestly the most interesting fight. I do think Cruz needs a little more time in time in the saddle. Cruz has only got 5 professional fights under him, but they're on a collision course, assuming they stay roughly in the same division. You even have somebody like Sam Noakes in the UK. He is 16-0. He's roughly around Keyshawn's age. He's a little bit older. He's 27, but there are so many good options. The next fight will likely be a fight card back in Norfolk or the vicinity because um, the Davis brothers absolutely sold that place out in their last appearance there. He talked about making a homecoming, and he's earned it. Plus, they'll do a really good gate there, and Top Rank loves to load up their cards with a lot of the um, other rising star prospects. You could put Abdullah Mason on that card and build his reputation. I imagine the Norfolk fans will absolutely love him as well. So this is proof that if you focus, if you work, if you listen to what people are telling you that have been down that road long before you can get there. And Keyshawn is turning out to be the talent of that Tokyo 2020 delayed games. He really is. I couldn't be more delighted for him. He absolutely earned it. He learned that hard lesson that he had, and I think that's well behind him.
Absolutely. And right now, the world is his oyster at 135. And as you mentioned, there's a litany of fighters and opportunities for him in that division. Let's move on to the news. And the news is related to this particular fight that we just talked about, as well as the aforementioned Teofimo Lopez, who we talked about earlier in our discussion about over um, Barboza's win in excuse me, technical issue on my hand. Barboza's win earlier against Jack Catterall, right? Couple of days prior to Davis Berinchyk, Keyshawn went to social media, went to Twitter, and posted a picture of a basket that was sent to him. The basket was filled with bananas and watermelon, and he felt that was, in his words, racist. I get it. Why? Because to do that, something like that kind of gesture towards an African American, a black fighter in particular, in 2025, it is still offensive. For those who don't think so, you're wrong. I'm just telling you right now, it is offensive. Keyshawn raised a fuss about it during the final pre-fight press conference and during the weigh-in. Turns out that and at the time he felt that it was Team Berinchyk who sent that to him. Turns out it was not Berinchyk. Why do I mention Teofimo? Where does this come in? In reaction to uh, the words of Keyshawn Davis, while playing that video of Keyshawn Davis discussing that incident, Teofimo, the camera panned to Teofimo, and he was sitting there laughing at Keyshawn while eating a banana um, with the ascribed "Make Boxing Great Again" um, in his response, in his subtweet, basically. Now, a lot of people uh, were not happy with Teofimo. Teofimo thought he was being. I'll reserve that. I'll just say a lot of people were not happy with Teofimo. I'll go to you, Daniel. I'll go to you, and you can follow up, Gail. What do you make of the incidents uh, in the lead up to Keyshawn Davis's win over Berinchyk?
Well, considering the almost month that we have gone through in this country since Martin Luther King Day, sadly, this isn't surprising because a whole lot of attitudes feel very, very emboldened. And particularly, I recognize the attitude when it comes to Teofimo, or as you call him in Spanish, el hijo de gran puta. Because
Do you care to
ultimately,
translate?
I just call I just said he's just the son of the great bitch.
Ah,
Because that is bitch made behavior. Let's be blunt. That is bitch made behavior. The Teofimo came out from it. But there is also, unfortunately, a sentiment that did rise up, unfortunately, because of politics, because of the election, that the divide, unfortunately, between the Black and Latino community has unfortunately widened since. Because I can tell you right now, people like Teofimo in their complexion, they fully believe in the anti-blackness that's in the Latino community. And they feel emboldened by the current political climate. Will it bite Teofimo in the ass? Hopefully it should. It should. Because Teofimo's been writing a lot of checks that his ass hasn't really not been able to cash over the past few years. But it's sadly not surprising. And like I mentioned, the basket. Yeah, a decade and a half ago, it would have been a joke because of Gabriel Iglesias, because he made himself a joke, but you can't do it at this stage. You cannot do it when we're literally watching things completely break down. It's completely unacceptable.
Gail?
This is Teofimo's normal MO, right? He has said and done a whole shit ton of offensive things through his career. He's got a big ass mouth. He steps in it frequently. To me, this made complete sense when he took credit for it. It's just so him. When somebody tells you who they are, believe them, right? His only objective.
Shout out Maya Angelou.
Yes, thank you very much. His only objective is to rattle somebody's cage. This is his idea of getting someone off balance, right? And it naturally, understandably, made Davis, his family, his team extremely upset, extremely angry, especially when they thought his opponent did it. You know, Credit to him for later realizing that Berinchy's team couldn't really have been responsible for it, accepted what they had to say as an honest response that no, we weren't responsible. And Davis apologized for making the accusation against him that turned out to be unfounded. And, it was kind of a natural thing to assume. Fight week, this happens. What is a little perplexing, and I haven't heard anybody actually figure this out, is apparently this was in Davis's room. Did somebody get access to his hotel room? Did somebody at the hotel actually accept this thing and deliver it? Did they know what was in it? Did they not? There's some details that are missing here, but you know, unfortunately, this sort of bad behavior happens every day in this country. And once in a while, something makes an incident like this rise to our consciousness because either someone well known is involved or there's some other aspect to it that makes it out of the norm. But ladies and gentlemen, this happened today somewhere, some sort of incident along these lines. It will happen again tomorrow. Um, and we need to decide as Americans whether we think this is acceptable or not, and it is not.
Okay, Teofimo thought he was being coy, thought he was being cute, thought he was being funny. Um, but what he is, he's a troll, number one, and he's a racial arsonist, if not an outright bigot. To your point, Gail, this is nothing new to him. Daniel, you talked about how, let's just say, since you know who was reelected, a lot of people been showing their ass. I would argue with Teofimo, this predates that. Let's not forget, um, after he beat Lomachenko to become unified, not undisputed, unified lightweight champion, he went on an active campaign um, dissing Top Rank, basically saying that he's being undervalued and underpaid. There was an infamous rant on a podcast, on a YouTube show, in which he said that black fighters are getting favoritism by Top Rank over him. And he blasted those black fighters. I don't think it's an accident that he has blasted over the years um, Tim Bradley and Andre Ward, targeting them out and volleying criticism after criticism after criticism towards them. It's not a coincidence. What he's throughout 2024, um, the comments about Terrence Crawford, the fact that he referred to him as a quote unquote monkey. And then when the boxing community was like, nah, bruh, you going too far, he doubled and tripled down. To your point, Gail, this is who he is. Now, in reaction to his what he did, his subtweet, there's been a campaign that black fighters specifically not fight this dude. In the aftermath of his win over Berinchyk, Keyshawn was asked about a fight against Teofimo Lopez, and they've had their history, back and forth, trash talk. Before this fight, Keyshawn was like, "Yeah, I really want to fight Teofimo." Afterwards, he says he doesn't want to fight him. He does because he doesn't want to reward his actions with a payday. Um, Shushu Carrington um, posted on Twitter after Teofimo Lopez's comments, like, "Bro, what are you doing?" There have been other black fighters who's like, no, he doesn't. There's been two minds. There's some who feel that fight him, yeah, just to shut him up and beat him up and literally beat some sense into him. And then there's another section that's been like, no, you don't reward him and his kind of behavior. The reality is that he keeps this up. He thinks he's being coy, but what he's doing, he hadn't realized it because, let's face it, Teofimo is one of these cats who thinks he's the smartest fighter in the room, the smartest person in the room, excuse me. But he's ostracizing himself within the boxing community. And he keeps on with this. Top Rank is not going to put up with it. He's already on thin ice with them, just like Big Baby Anderson, and just like Big Baby Anderson is on thin ice with Top Rank. Because if you notice when this happened, Top Rank put out a statement. Now, I hadn't seen any response to what Teofimo did, but you best believe that the big brasses within Top Rank know what he did. And that's like, okay, he said this in the past. He said that in the past. He said this in the past. Another check mark on him. Um, I would not be surprised if that eventually, I don't care if he keeps winning, that they decide to let him go when his contract is up. And if he loses his next fight, that's an even greater incentive to say, let go with this dude because he's too much of a lightning rod. He's too much of he's too controversial. He can't be, I don't want to say controlled when talking about a human being like that. That's the wrong word, but still, enough is enough. Because this is Teofimo is who he is. He keeps showing his stripes over the years. The only thing I will say in conclusion, while I'm glad that there are those in the boxing community who have called him out, who've checked him for this should have been happening because he's been doing this for a number of years now, and that's been given a pass. Final word on this, Daniel and Gail, before we move on.
The final word is we've given him too much daylight already.
Yeah, I have nothing more to say about this clown.
Beagle in the chat room, in the live chat, said it's sad and entirely unacceptable. He's also said that sadly, I've heard a lot of race-based bias in gyms. Won't outline which, but it's prevalent. True, to your point, that's true. But how many of these fighters have gone to this degree, um, going to respond in the way that Teofimo responds? Again, lucky this is on X. Lucky we are in today's. Because put it this way, not only is he a troll and a racial arsonist, there's a bit of cowardice behind him. He'll say all this about Bud, call him this and that, and say this and do this and that about Keyshawn. Will he do it in their face? No. You know he wouldn't. It's pump behavior. It's a pump move on his part. Uh, it's bitch assness on his part. And then I'm gonna leave it at that. Let's move on. Um, um, let's move on to the news. Kind of the main news that one of the main stories that happened while during our hiatus, excuse me, is Canelo. Like right, Gail. In the past, we've talked about Turki Alalshikh and um, the inroads he's made in the sport, and one of the fighters who we had felt really is not ready to play the game, quote unquote, for lack of better phrasing, when it comes to Turki Alalshikh is one Canelo Alvarez. Well, news we now know that with all the talk of a bout between Canelo and Crawford that's been popped off for the last few weeks, and it looks like they're going to fight in September. And Canelo has signed a 4-fight deal with Turki Alalshikh. Your reaction uh, um, to this news? I've heard people say it's a smart move on the part of Canelo. I've heard others express disappointment in Canelo, saying that he basically went for the money and he didn't need it. He didn't need to do it because he's making enough money as is. Your reaction to Canelo and this deal with Riyadh season?
Listen, Canelo is a very smart manager of his career. He has always been in charge in a way that not a lot of fighters are. He has really set himself up well from a managerial standpoint. And he was smart to do this deal from his perspective. It teed up the opponents that he's willing to fight. It set a pathway for him to make kind of a, glide down to landing, because this is likely going to be the last 4 fights of his career. And now he's in a position where he's not going to have to worry about some of the business side things. He, for whatever reason, decided that fight with Terrence Crawford, which is simply too alluring to pass up. The money's there, the interest is there. It's become a big blockbuster fight. It's going to do a massive box office if it is indeed staged in Las Vegas at Allegiant Stadium. That's the kind of show that Canelo relishes and, can get himself motivated for. He gets to have a tee-up fight. And, ladies and gentlemen, I have the receipts to prove it. I have been saying all along that it was going to be William Skull because of all his tune-up fight options. That one had a belt attached. He could get that belt
And
back.
it's the easiest.
Is among the easiest. So there were some other options that were equally as bad. Bruno Saras, no, I don't think so. But
No.
mean, that we're going to see that rematch. That should be interesting. But this means that extra layer of spice is attached to that match with Crawford, because then it is absolutely for all the goodies at super middleweight. So Crawford will risk his record, move up 2 full weight divisions, tee up that fight. That's a massive money fight. That's a massive prestige fight, no matter what we all may think of it. The following 2 fights in 2026 are still undetermined. Nobody knows who those opponents will be, and it really is way too far out to say. A lot of things can happen in the next 12 months. Canelo can get injured to the point that his career is over. He could lose to Crawford and change the trajectory of his career at that point. Lose interest, who knows? But in any event, he did the deal, and make no mistake, the 72 hours or so that led up to the formal announcement of the deal were all absolutely engineered by Alvarez, and he had a willing accomplice in Turki Alalshikh, in part through Turki Alalshikh's new megaphone, Ring Magazine. Ring Magazine floated different bits of information that were quoted as fact about how the negotiations were going or weren't going. And we've never had any reason to believe that Ring Magazine was publishing anything less than what they acknowledged through sources was fact. We've now heard from Turki Alalshikh himself that some of that was purposely published misinformation. That's a discussion for another time, but that should concern fans a great deal. A great deal. But nobody should harbor any ill will towards Canelo. We've said it on this podcast already once, and we've said it before. Boxing is a business. It's called prize fighting for a reason. Canelo's, career, admittedly, very much looks like it's past his peak. Canelo has made it clear for years he wanted to retire by the time he's 37 years old. Well, that birthday would be July 18th, 2027. So if he has 2 fights in 2025, 2 more in 2026, a little bit of margin for injuries or other considerations for those 4 fights. Fights can legitimately be delayed. God knows we've seen plenty of fights delayed due to injuries in camp, during sparring, whatever it is. Now, I'm sure he was, in fact, negotiating with Jake Paul. But despite what you may think Jake Paul published, there was not a contract.
Right. I'm glad you said it.
The signatures that were published were a confidentiality agreement. And certainly that means you're not going to talk about, how the negotiations themselves are going. So anything you heard about negotiations or not didn't come from anybody that signed a confidentiality agreement. Well, apparently the only ones that signed that were Alvarez and his manager and Jake Paul and his business partner. He used that as a deflection, and it did offer him a fallback. It offered him a fallback in the event that Turki Alalshikh wasn't willing to play ball, and it forced him to the negotiating table with Canelo. And it gave Canelo the upper hand because in negotiations, the guy that has the upper hand is the one willing to walk away, right? And there's a little bit of friction there because it's been well acknowledged that Turki Alalshikh and Jake Paul dislike each other's business models, and any deal with one completely shuts out the other, right? So if as rumored, the Riyadh deal is worth a hot $350 million to Canelo Alvarez. Well, you know what? Well played to him.
Right.
$350 million. I mean, if the 4-fight deal goes through, he gets his 4 fights and it concludes, and he wants to take on Jake Paul as the last fight of his career as a big time spectacle, he could still do that, and he'll still reach his goal of retiring at 37 in July 2027, right? If he wants a sanctioned, legitimate title fight. And the one other item for those still wondering, does this mean that he'll never cross paths with David Benavidez? Probably, because the likely opponent, should everything go well, will have Canelo coasting toward the finish line. Maybe he takes that rematch with Dmitry Bivol, depending on perhaps what happens this weekend. Maybe he entertains a rising contender, a Christian Mbili or something of that nature, Diego Pacheco. But nothing's assured. I mean, Alvarez can be injured, like we say. Alvarez could lose to Buster Doug Skull. I mean, who knows? Or Crawford. We don't know how that long-term deal will end up being affected. Here's where I want to conclude, however. The more important topic of the 4-fight deal to me, particularly as a North American boxing fan here in Southern California who considers that central headquarters of fighting known as the Los Angeles, Las Vegas area, is what happens to all of Canelo's devoted Mexican American, and American fans who have embraced him all these years, who've made him famous and wealthy, and will go to see his fights, who've put up huge gates in all these locations. Well, the only fight we understand will take place outside Saudi Arabia for the rest of Canelo's career will be that one fight in Allegiant Stadium. The other 3 are all going to be in Riyadh. And that's a shame. That's really a shame. And that is not good news for the state of boxing in the United States and Mexico. Nothing generates more enthusiasm and more long-term loyalty from boxing fans than that experience of seeing a fight card in person, being part of that roaring crowd, hearing the punches land for yourself, seeing them with your own eyes. It's priceless, and that's what keeps people loyal to the sport. But with all of these major events moving offshore, future fan growth is going to take a serious hit. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 3, 5, 10 years. But this is not good news for the long-term future of boxing on Western Hemisphere shores.
To your point, quiet is kept. The Southwest, the Mexican American base, particularly that Vegas, LA area, that carries the sport here in the United States, right? Despite whether yeah, it does. And there's nothing that draws a crowd. There's no more loyal base, particularly in that area, particularly when there is a star/superstar Mexican fighter, right? You saw it in the 80s and 90s with Chavez. You saw it with De La Hoya. You've seen it with Canelo, right? The question is, with Canelo nearing the end of his career, who's going to carry that torch? you don't see anybody uh, right now. Maybe Benavidez. We're not sure.
Yeah, right now it is
Uh,
Benavidez. No question, it is Benavidez now.
but
Maybe,
outside of, go
maybe
ahead.
maybe it'll be Diego Pacheco. I have some hope for that. Um,
Bam.
Or it
Bam
could be a
Rodriguez.
combination of
Yep.
multiple fighters, like a
Yep.
Benavidez, like a Bam.
But
So it'll be
what is interesting is I was just in Anaheim 2 nights ago to see Oscar Duarte, not exactly a big name, right? In general in boxing, against an opponent who's had losses, who's, just a solid performer, um, in Miguel Madueno. That place was packed. It was crazy. People were in their seats early and they were into it. None of those purses that night were super huge. Um, in fact, I don't think many of them made over six figures at all. In fact, some of the guys way deep on the undercard were making, $5,000. So that is a very affordable card to put on for Golden Boy. I guarantee you they made money on that card. That development has to continue because that's where the Canelos come from. Maybe get some of those young guys on the undercard. I've got very high hopes for Joel Iriarte, who's an extremely talented fighter, still in single digits, knocking guys out. He passes the smell test right now. We'll see. But we're going to have to hustle it up in the next couple of years to find that Latino star that drives fan interest. Mexican Americans are absolutely keeping boxing alive in the United States right now. Now, maybe
that's
we're going
right.
to get some help, when we see somebody like Keyshawn Davis. I also have hope for that. But otherwise, boxing is still very, very popular in the UK. Boxing is incredibly popular in Asia, in some other countries, Mexico, of course, in itself. But they're going to end up carrying the sport and moving on without us.
Before I go to you, Daniel, interesting comment here from Beagle. He says, "Sorry, but that was brilliant negotiating. So this is how much I am worth with a Jake fight, getting the boxing dollars he wants, and the legacy fight with Crawford. If Canelo loses, he says, lost to one of the uh, next comment here, lost to a better boxer, and it's not only true, but his fans will love it." Speak before we move on. Speak to that aspect of Paul. In my opinion, this is my opinion. Paul, like Tiafimo, often thinks he is smarter than everybody in the room from a business aspect when it comes to the sport. We talked about how, in the aftermath of that quote unquote fight with Mike Tyson, how he was calling himself the new face of boxing, where he wasn't really the draw. Mike Tyson was, and he's continued to do so. Now, in the midst of all this stuff with Canelo signing with Turki Alalshikh, he went on this rant talking about this. He had a fight with signed with Canelo. Now, as you accurately put, Gail, that was not a real dead set contract, right? But Paul has continued to go on here. Am I wrong in saying that within this, despite Paul's boasting and bloviating, that Canelo showed him how to play boxing chess, while Paul running his mouth was really getting played and played was really got caught playing checkers here?
He didn't get played. I think you were going to say that
Not
he
played
not.
the wrong word. Played is the wrong word.
Yeah,
Put it
he
this way: Canelo was playing chess here the whole time, while Paul was really got introduced to how the game really goes here.
I think that's a little harsh, frankly. Negotiations take place. Sometimes they're concluded to everyone's liking, and sometimes they fail. That's just the bottom line.
But to me, it was like that fight was never gonna. That fight was not
Uh,
going to happen anytime soon. The long term,
I just
the long
I
game here,
firmly
he was
I
always going to sign
firmly
with Turkey
I
Alalshikh.
No, I firmly disagree. I firmly disagree in that. That was an absolute legitimate option for Canelo because if he doesn't get what he wants, terms for Turki Alalshikh again, the strong negotiator is the guy who can walk away. And Canelo could have walked away for any reason. Canelo could have walked away and has had harsh things to say in the past when he has felt disrespected by Turki Alalshikh. That would have alone been enough for him to walk away because, let's face it, he has generational wealth. This is not really about the money, in my opinion. In my opinion, it's getting on what he sees as a big stage and locking down the trajectory of his career toward retirement. I think he wants that clear path, that assurance of where it's going. He's always been willing to take those 1 or 2 fight deals one at a time. Frankly, I think that part of it is wearing him out. And if you're thinking about retirement, you want a clear path, you want to walk things down and then just focus on getting there. And to me, I think that's what it was about. But if it hadn't worked out to his liking, he would have bailed, and he would have absolutely taken that Paul fight. That is easy money for him. I do think one thing that convinced him to stay at the table with Turki, and I don't think they're ever going to be best of friends, no matter what public face they show, is he heard the fans not being all that happy about the Paul fight. Boxing fans, certainly many of them expressed themselves that they weren't into this. They really didn't want to see it. I do think that had some influence, but
I
I
think
don't.
it had some as well because
But I
why
don't.
fight a Paul coming off of that farce, given all the backlash that Paul took for that?
Well, if that was the better option and the money option and easy money, and things didn't work out with the Saudis in Riyadh season, I have no question to me that Canelo would have walked. So I don't think that was put there as a straw man by any means. I do think there was a real honest negotiation, but that it was nowhere near as far along or as solidified as anyone seemed to think.
Now let's get Daniel into this. We've been talking enough. Your thoughts, Daniel?
Oh, well, Gail, this is where I respectfully disagree.
Good.
I respectfully disagree because to me, in one sense, Canelo was playing checkers while Jake Paul was playing shoots and ladders. You were not even on the same type of board. Because unfortunately, the Paul brothers have completely bought into their own hype. And unfortunately, we have to tolerate them, particularly if you're a fan of women's boxing, because it's the only way somebody like Amanda Serrano can actually get paid. So there's that. But, Jesus Christ, I am so disappointed in Canelo. I am very, very disappointed that he actually went with the blood money mark. And because there's one of the things that you could have respected Canelo for in a lot of senses, his stance on principles. And this looked like this was a stance on principle because we're seeing what's happening. We're seeing the sport being taken over by not only an individual that's working on behalf of a foreign government at that. And now, not only does that individual have connection with the fighters, you've bought basically the magazine of record for the sport in the ring, and you've turned it into a propaganda wing. It's a sad day when Tank Davis, of all people, is the only one you can say is standing on the somewhat principles on this. Now, I do agree, yeah, if it's money, it was probably going to be the most money he was going to make. And if you're going to have a fight in Vegas, you're going to have it at Allegiant Stadium. It could be the Bud fight. But there's just always going to be the factor of it. Three of those 4 fights are going to be in Saudi Arabia, which automatically takes away your home field advantage on any fight that you have. Because we've seen those Saudi crowds. They, for the most part, do not care.
Well, you're very kind to call them crowds, first of all, because they're not.
Well, yeah, it's mostly just rich people being there because they have to be there. But that's the main thing. But again, it's taken away his advantage in that area. And number 2, unless something happens in 2026, maybe things completely change. We don't know. But because he had the Munguia fight, he lost that line. He lost that statement where he kind of said, I will never fight another Mexican for a championship. I won't do it. Well, he did it with Munguia. So now he lost any and all excuses for why, at least in 2026, if you're not going to do the Crawford fight in 2020, sorry, you're not going to do it in 2025, May 2026, it should not be anybody question. It should be David Benavidez. But unfortunately, we have more than likely it's not going to be. Now, if it's a rematch with Bivol, that's understandable. You're trying to avenge a loss, a really sound technical loss at that. But it just would leave a really, really bad taste in people's mouth because Canelo could have just easily, like I said, given the political situation happening, he could have easily just said, you know what, I'm just going to have all my remaining fights in Mexico. I'm just going to make Stadio Azteca my home for the remainder of my career. And people would have showed up. And he could have brought people in. Now, would it have screwed over Las Vegas? Yeah. But it would have been a principled stance. Now, you're going to a country that they don't really care about the sport. They just care about owning aspects to sports watch their reputation. That's where I'm disappointed in Canelo.
Well, and we're 100% in agreement with that, is that all the big fight events, not just Canelo, all the big fight events around the world are starting slowly but surely to be moved to Saudi Arabia. And that's a problem. That's a problem. I get it. I don't blame the fighters themselves for taking the big checks when they get to that stage, but it is a slap in the face to the fans who've supported them all the way on the way up, because not many people are going to travel to Saudi Arabia, and I'm certainly not going to ever cross those borders to cover a fight. It's just not going to happen. So that's a huge issue. And I agree that, I'm not thrilled about the Saudis becoming the world's premier boxing promoters, but they have the right to do business. They have the money to do business. So be it. I do have a problem with that same promoter taking over what has traditionally been an independent boxing publication, which has also gotten into a very influential ranking system and delivering a belt that most fighters prize, that has no sanctioning fee, that has a very rigid set of rules. In fact, you hear a lot of complaints about the Ring Magazine belt not being in play because it did, fit the criteria, and that has always been held to account. And now we've got to adjust, and everyone needs to be very clear about how Ring Magazine has changed. It is no longer an independent publication. Now, there are a lot of media publications out there that are mouthpieces. We understand that they are promotional vehicles. That's fine. But what happens to the ratings committee? What happens to the Ring Magazine belt now that it is coming from a mouthpiece of one promoter? I'm still willing to watch and wait and see what happens, but I was frankly shocked to hear Al-Sheikh himself admit that disinformation was printed about these negotiations.
New world, folks, with Turki Alalshikh and with Ring Magazine, and apparently with the signing of Canelo. Where this goes with him ultimately, only thing we know right now, he's going to fight Skull, uh, I think in May, and then he's going to fight presumably Tank in September. Beyond that,
Crawford,
do not know
not Tank.
Crawford. Excuse me, not
Crawford.
Tank. What I'm saying, I'm listening to a Tank interview blast Teofimo for his act of in reaction to Keyshawn Davis. My apologies, it's kind of late breaking stuff, but Teo, put it this way, Tank didn't like the way that Teofimo's been acting and some of the rhetoric he's been using either. Should not be a surprise because, yeah, as I stated earlier in my rant, there's been a litany of fighters um, and other boxing enthusiasts who are not happy with one Teofimo Lopez and felt he went too far with that subtweet in response to Keyshawn. But we've discussed that enough already. Let's get to these fights that's coming up. You mentioned Turki Alalshikh got a big card this coming weekend. Headline, of course, by the rematch between Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol. We will talk about that to close things out, but let's talk about all of these fights that's taking place beforehand. I go back to you. Before that, I'm going to switch things up. A week from today, this live recording here on February 17th, on the 24th, you got Junto Nakatani fighting David Cuellar. For anybody who wants to comment on this, your thoughts. Nakatani, 3-division champion, been steamrolling guys. Interesting aspect is that Nakatani, who's tall for a lightweight fighter, like roughly 5'8", is going to be in the ring with someone who's even taller than him. Cuellar's more of a boxer, in my opinion, while Nakatani, boxer, puncher, devastating power, can hurt you to the head and body. He seems to be on a roll, Gil and Daniel. Um, how much resistance do you think Cuellar can give him, or is it going to be another case of Nakatani doing what he has to do and being pretty dominant here?
Listen, great fighters don't often get to match up with someone at their talent level. And the only thing they can do and should do is face the best available opponent, right? And I think we've got something like that here. I think that Nakatani, will get a best effort. And to his credit, he is based in and trains in Los Angeles, where he is very, very familiar with Mexican and Latino opponents, right? And I think takes great pride in that and in sparring them and incorporating that into his skill set. But yeah, he'll get some rounds in, he'll get some work. His fans will get to see him. He stays in front of them and in their consciousness. So as he heads towards what we all hope is, a mega fight here in the calendar year 2025, that he doesn't disappear. And that's just so smart for him to do this, whether we think it's a really challenging matchup or not, whether it rises to the I'm willing to get up in the wee hours of the morning on a Monday to watch him live versus watching it later. It might be one of those fights that you're content to see it later and avoid social media if you don't want to know the outcome. But I say good to him. That's exactly what someone in his position should do. There's so much importance in activity, and we see that proven over and over at the top levels. When somebody decides not to get in the ring because they want a certain level of opponent and they end up being out for months at a time, that does not do your career any good.
Indeed, and you just wish more fighters would follow that template that Nakatani's doing right now. Again, that's going to Nakatani right defending the WBC 118-pound belt against David Cuellar. That's going to be February 24th in Japan on ESPN Plus, if memory serves me correct. But let's get to these fights in this card in Saudi Arabia. It's so many fights that I didn't put them all here on the docket. It will take us another 30, 45 minutes just to cover them. So what I'm going to do is split these fights up. Let's start, Daniel, with Vergil Ortiz, who has an interim world title at 154, fighting Israil Madrimov. Madrimov, very good guy. Ortiz, just now, well, not just now, but still, he's trying to get his sea legs officially at 154 pounds. Styles make fights, and I think that the styles of both men, I think, is going to produce a fairly decent scrap here.
Like you mentioned, this is Vergil trying to get his feet wet in 154. We know what his journey has been, the health skills that he's had trying to make 147. Now, as I said, back in the new division, has an interim belt. Like I said, in a division that's pretty wide open. And it's best not to show him proof, because right now, until he faces a top caliber opponent, maybe one of those could be Bud. But until we get to that point, we have to see how it's tested in. It should be a decent fight. I predict probably the Vergil's probably going to take this into the middle to late rounds, because he's not. I don't think he's going to try to show out. He's going to want to see how his body feels at perfectly 154 and how he's going to be able to move one in that ring of 154. And I think he'll probably pull it out. I would say mid, like 9th to 10th round, he'll probably be able to take a guy out. And hopefully that means opens up to get not just an interim belt, but the actual belt down the line.
Indeed. Also on this card, Gail, Carlos Adames, who has the WBC belt at 160, fighting Hamzah Sheeraz. And the sad reality is that 160 has become mid, one of boxing's high profile divisions, at least traditionally, is not what it was. I think there's a real lack of talent there, lack of depth, overall depth at a world level there. Adames has the belt. He's a good fighter, but there's a bit of an unknown quality about Sheeraz. Been getting a lot of buzz within the UK circuit. He's wanted this fight. He called for this fight. He gets it. How do you think he will fare? I think he has talent, but he's young,
There's a lot of great young fighters that are taking these challenges on, and they're not waiting around. They're 20, 22, 23 and going for it. And I think Sheeraz is in a perfect position to be one of those guys. He is absolutely passing the eye test with every fight with me. He looks good.
Yeah.
He's aggressive. I mean, why not bet on yourself? Adames is a fine fighter, but you're right. The middleweight division is going through a bit of a dry spell right now. And I'm not sure that Adames would be a belt holder in another era with enough talent. Sheeraz is the guy everyone's counting on to resurrect the middleweight division, and I do think he could do it. He's got a lot of power. He has to be able to find Adames, who might be tough to find in the ring. I mean, I'm not convinced Adames will stand there in front of him. And as long as he can do that, I think that he's got this fight well in hand. I just want to comment again on the Ortiz-Madrimov fight. This is Ortiz Jr.'s 4th fight at super welterweight. He's hardly getting his feet wet at this point. He's well established, and I think he'll take care of Madrimov, no problem. Again, though, very common issue for both Sheeraz and Ortiz Jr. and more for Ortiz Jr. Madrimov is going to make himself very hard to find. Go back and look at his fight with Crawford. He was in and out. He moves. Ring generalship's going to be the difference in the fight for Ortiz Jr. And
Yeah, that's why I think
yeah,
my Dreamoff is going to give Ortiz a tougher bout
he is very,
because
very slippery. Yeah,
he's slick. He's slick, very slick.
yeah. I don't think he can hurt Ortiz Jr., who, say what you will about Sergey Boychuk, that was a hell of a test. To say he's not faced anyone elite, I think, is a bit of an insult to Boychuk. And Ortiz took some hellacious shots from him, and he stood up to most of them. The knockdowns, both of them were a bit flash knockdowns. So Ortiz Jr. has got to cut off the ring. I mean, I hope he is practicing his control of the real estate. That's what's going to matter in that fight. And I think to a lesser degree for Sheeraz too, but I feel more confident about him being able to do that, mostly because I'm not sure that Adames is quite as slick and elusive in the ring. But I do think this is Sheeraz's fight to lose.
Speaking of fighters who are not waiting around, young fighters who are not waiting around and shooting for the gold, literally, Floyd Schofield basically talked his way, him and his dad mainly, basically talked his way into a fight with Shakur Stevenson, who's WBC champion at 135, Daniel. Either Schofield is better than I think he is going to rise to the occasion, or Stevenson is just going to expose the kid for being a kid and box his shoes off. Now we know Stevenson is coming off of hand surgery. On the surface, Stevenson should be too slick for Schofield. I've seen Schofield hit. I don't trust his, based on what I've seen, I don't trust his defense. In truth, I don't even trust his corner for that matter. I don't know. I don't trust his corner, specifically his dad and what he's teaching him. But the kid is strong. The kid is ambitious. The kid is eager. And if Stevenson has some reservations about that hand, he could be in for some trouble. But based on what I've seen so far from both men, Stevenson should outbox him and should outbox him by a pretty comfortable margin.
Yeah, if it's just mainly based on boxing ability, if it's mainly based on just that alone ability, how you move in the ring, Shakur should walk away this pretty unscathed. However, you didn't mention it. One, he don't really know how good that hand is. And number two, you don't really know how confident Schofield really is in this situation, because you mentioned he literally talked himself into this fight. But it wasn't a situation where his promoter was pushing it, and he and his dad talked him into this fight, which tells you that they see something,
or the fact that
they
he's
can
just too young
exploit.
and dumb. He's just too young and dumb to know better,
Yeah,
even to be scared.
and that's the thing about being young. Canelo was the same. Canelo was the same way at 22 years old when he fought Floyd. It didn't turn out the way he wanted it, but he did learn from it. It's also a good test for Schofield, because now you can actually come in, and even if you lose, make yourself good, and you can learn from it, because you're still young, you have power, and you're going to be able to grow into 135, 140, probably even 147 at the end of the career. But if it's like say, if it's mainly just based on boxing skill alone, Shakur should walk away from this pretty soundly. But we mentioned it before. I mentioned it once. I'll mention it forever. It only takes one punch to really change a career.
That's right. Also on this card, Gail, Daniel Dubois Joseph Parker. Now, Dubois coming off of the stoppage win over Anthony Joshua. Resurrection for Dubois, maybe the comeback fighter of 2024. He's been steamrolling guys. Can he do the same against Joseph Parker, who's had his own kind of sea change in his career after a loss and looking shaken in performances? He's looked fairly decent, pretty strong in recent outings, including the win over Wilder. Uh, um, yeah, can for me, can Dubois roll over Parker in the same way that he's been rolling over his previous opponents?
I think Parker is going to make this a much trickier fight than
Yeah,
anyone imagines. Parker has had some tremendous wins. You know, he isn't flashy. He is not a big knockout puncher in a big knockout punchers division. But what he does so well against some of the big punchers, and Dubois is proving in his current state to be a big puncher, Parker disarms them.
he's
Parker
cagey,
takes
very
away
cagey.
that weapon, yeah, and that comes from all the years of work he's put in as probably the most elite level sparring partner in the heavyweight division. Um, and the other heavyweights bring Parker in for a reason because he is tricky, because he does present ways of taking away your best weapons. And they want to learn from that. That's why they bring him in. That's why Tyson Fury has used him so often. But that's also taught Parker to refine that talent. I think this is a lot more of a pick 'em fight than people recognize. It doesn't mean it's going to be the most exciting fight to watch. I mean, it is not going to be a thriller like the Joshua fight. But we'll see what happens. Dubois could really struggle with this, um, tricky guy in front of him. It would be an upset if Parker won, but I don't think it would be a huge upset. It's going to be very interesting to see what the money line is right before the fight and how it proceeds as that fight gets started. This is going to be a very interesting fight to watch. And I do think, in a lot of ways, one of the closer matchups on a very stacked card.
Would not be surprised one bit if Parker were to win, um, either by decision or by late round stoppage, because again, he's sturdy, he's tricky. When he's on, he has a good jab and he has better footwork, I think, than Dubois. Dubois is the bigger hitter. I think Dubois is the physically stronger guy, and he's fighting with a tremendous amount of confidence. But this is heavyweight boxing. All you need is some. I ain't gonna say all you need, but if you have some slick skills, and if you got some, and guys that big can hurt each other. Um, and so, yeah, in short, Parker, to your point, Gail, is a live dog here. Very live underdog here. Main event, of course, the rematch between Beterbiev and Bivol. They fought last time. Beterbiev won by majority decision to become undisputed at 175. I'm going back to you to start the conversation, Gail. Well, I'll go to Daniel first, and then you can end things off here. A lot of folks felt, more than a few folks, I should say, felt that in their first fight, Bivol did enough to deserve the verdict. I was a little bit surprised, Daniel, by how much Bivol was able to stand and trade with Beterbiev in spots, right? Um, could we see a scenario where even though Bivol was lost, quote unquote, in their first fight, he's the one who has gained a tremendous amount of confidence because he was able to stand there and take shots and trade. And we know how much he can box. can we even see a better version of Bivol in the rematch here against Beterbiev?
I There's two factors that are in Bivol's favor. One is that underlying confidence that a good amount of people feel that you did win that first fight. In hindsight, it was a lot closer to me that probably was saw at the time. I could see how Beterbiev could win, but like I said, a lot of people believe that Bivol won that fight. That's that confidence. And then number two, Beterbiev unfortunately is only still getting older.
Yeah.
He's still getting a little bit slower now. Granted, power is the last thing to leave from you when you're fighting, but there's also the fact that unfortunately Beterbiev can't really move.
And 40
No,
years old is 40 years old.
hmm can't really move, and he can't even move like to how it was 2.5 years ago, let alone now at this stage. And Bivol, for all intents and purposes, he probably is entering, if not already getting close to the middle of his physical prime. So there is a possibility that you're going to catch him, Beterbiev, at the wrong moment, at the right time, especially when you know you've taken his best shots and you've shown that you can stand up to it. That's got to give Bivol a lot of confidence. Ultimately, to me, it's going to be a factor of how better can Bivol move to avoid the power shots of Beterbiev, the body shots, and can he move enough where the regression of movement from Beterbiev really becomes evident? Because granted, it's like he still was able to move, but we have seen fights over and over again when somebody becomes old overnight. And Beterbiev, unfortunately, has been on the precipice of a few of those fights. This might be the one where it actually does happen.
To your point, Daniel, there's been questions about Beterbiev and uh, whether the age and the attrition and the injuries will finally catch up to him. So far, it hasn't been the case. I think that it may finally catch up to him in this fight. I like how Bivol fought that first fight. I think he can only get better from that first fight in October. He'll learn what he did well and what he didn't do well, and the weaknesses that he saw in Beterbiev. And I think Bivol will do what he has to do to get a decision in this one. Your thoughts, Gail, to close things out?
100%. I think that the man that will make the better adjustments is Bivol, and he's very motivated. He is not particularly an animated guy, if you've heard him interviewed. And I've had the pleasure of working with him. He is a very steady, calm personality. But he's pissed. He's pissed that he lost his belt. He's pissed that his record is now got a defeat on it. He is motivated. I think that he is, in a lot of ways, more motivated than Beterbiev is. And that's the guy that's going to do what it takes to adjust, to learn. I think he's obsessed with righting this wrong. And if he does, the fans may be the winners to get a trilogy fight, because if they're even a piece, I think we'll probably see a third fight. It wasn't quite the barn burner we expected, but it was still a tense, thrilling fight. And I do think we'll see a very similar fight, but I think Bivol will pull it out this time.
I'd rather see Bivol and Benavidez in a third fight with Bivol and Beterbiev. That's just my thought. Just
Well, it's a lot of money involved by the number one
saying.
fan who
You're right. You're
makes a
right, though.
difference.
You're right.
And
Money
it's
talks.
fair
Money
enough for
talks.
the two of them to decide to settle it with a trilogy between them. Um, I think that would be the right thing to do. And Bivol still got plenty of time to fight
Right.
Benavidez.
This is this is professional boxing at the end of the day. But we'll talk about that more on the next episode. Um, I want to thank everybody who joined us. Um, Larry listened for his comments. He says that Bivol versus Beterbiev can change right up into the ring walk. He thinks Beterbiev will win by stoppage. He also says that he thinks that Dubois will beat Parker. Parker outboxes him early, but Dubois knocks him out anywhere from round 7 through 10. He says it's going to lead up to undisputed between Dubois and Usyk. Of course, it can change. That his thoughts could change. And again, I want to thank him and his comments. I want to thank Beagle with with his comments as well. I'll go around the panel here. Begin the show with ladies first. In the show with ladies first, Gail from nyfights.com. For those who want to talk all things boxing, let the folks know where they can find you.
Right there. It's right on your screen, nyfights.com, nyfights.com. Uh, we are keeping an eye on everything. Obviously, the big ticket fight this weekend is in Saudi, but you have a few others we're keeping an eye on. Luis Neri is returning to the ring in Mexico on Saturday as well. So we've got it all, and we didn't comment on it, but Oscar Duarte got himself a very solid win, and he is a player in a very busy division.
Indeed, you're right about that. I omitted that fight. My apologies for that. I'll go. That Duarte fight took place this past weekend. Um,
And you can read
in
about it at nyfights.com because I was there ringside.
Right. So I go to you. I go to you, Daniel, from For Boxing News, and the Inscriber for those who want to talk boxing. For those who want to talk the NBA, especially to your beloved Miami Heat. For those who want to talk pro wrestling, let the folks know where they can find you.
Yes, folks, it's the same handle everywhere. Blue Sky, Twitter, Mastodon. I think, yeah, I even got Spill now. Ruckus99, RWKUZ99. Definitely say catch me on there. I'm doing less and less Twitter because it's becoming more and more of a Chernobyl as far as social media apps go, but we still
Yes.
care to catch it on there. Like, come on, folks. Like, just move to Blue Sky. We need to build Boxing Blue Sky for the love of God, please.
Amen. And I'm there as well. And more and more people are joining Blue Sky every day. It's a much more positive environment in a million ways.
Yeah, indeed. For those who want to talk boxing, music, fitness with me, you know what it is. Of course, like Daniel, you can follow me on Twitter because, like Daniel, I refuse to call it X, brother uh, JR76. Um, on IG, you can check me out, brother JRSC. And yes, I am on Blue Sky as well, brother JR76 on Blue Sky. For those on the next episode, we will do a recap of the Riyadh season. The next rendition, the next card of Riyadh season, we will have a recap of Beterbiev Bivol rematch of Dubois, Parker, Stevenson, Schofield, Adamas, and Sheeraz, Vergil Ortiz Jr. and Madrimov. We'll have a recap of uh, Nakatani and Cuellar and some more cards. We may have throw in some more cards on that Riyadh card. It may just because that Riyadh card is so lengthy. We may just do a show of just recaps and previews because there was so many on the fights. We didn't even talk about. Callum Smith is fighting Joshua Bawatsi. Zhili Zhang is fighting on that card as well. Ajit Kabayel, he's fighting on that as well. And we also talk about Neri and Kameda. I'm going to fight in the junior featherweight contest. And we also will talk about the fight that's going to happen on March 1st, most notably the return of Javante Tank Davis. He's fighting Lamont Roach in Brooklyn on that card. You're going to have Jose Valenzuela fighting Gary Anton Russell. Valenzuela defending his WBA belt at 140. Alberto Puello fighting Sando Martin for Puello's WBC belts at 140 pounds. And Super Mutias is also fighting on March 1st in Puerto Rico. So next week will be a heavy recap preview. Probably will not have much time for the news. Again, I want to thank everybody who put their comments earlier in the chat. After the lengthy hiatus, we're back. For Gail from nyfights.com, for Daniel from 4Boxing News and the Inscriber, I'm your host, Michael. This has been episode 463 of the Pound for Pound Box Report. We will see you guys next time. Everyone have a good evening. Good night.